The following is a conversation with Marsel Van Oosten, a Dutch master wildlife photographer. Marsel Van Oosten is responsible for taking some of the best wildlife photos of all time. And this is not just my opinion, but on a list of the 100 greatest wildlife photos ever taken, Marsel occupies, as close to an objective measure you can find in art, several rungs on that list. In addition to this, he is also responsible for having taken one of the most viewed photos of all time, which you've very likely seen. And if you think you know what it is, check out the link attached at the top of the description to see for sure. Marsel has been the recipient of many photography prizes. Most notably, he's been awarded Wildlife Photographer of the Year, Travel Photographer of the Year, and as well the International Nature Photographer of the Year. Marsel also works as a contributor with National Geographic. He surely has one of the most remarkable resumes for a living wildlife photographer, and he's taking some unbelievably beautiful photos. And obviously I'm not just saying that, it's really, really beautiful. Check out his book Mother if you want to get a taste for it. It was a real privilege to get a chance to speak with Marsel for so long. I think we actually ended up getting along quite well. I think him and I have very similar sensibilities, so it was a real pleasure. The conversation starts as a masterclass in wildlife photography and then ends with a casual discussion of Africa and more general topics in that vein. But of course, and as usual, navigate the chat with timestamps if you are so inclined. But also just listen from beginning to the end if you can, because such is the nature of these types of conversations. They can jump around a bit, and obviously you might miss out on the fun anecdote by just jumping directly to the timestamp on how do I take a good photo, for example. But in this chat, you can expect to hear about what works and then what doesn't when you're making a good photo, behind the scenes on some iconic shots that Marsel has taken, the economics of photography, an ISO-specific breakdown on one of his most famous shots, for just a very specific one for my fellow amateur photographers listening, Marcel's thoughts on the influence of social media with photography, China in Africa, which is obviously a huge mutual interest of which is a huge interest of mine, and now, as I know, a mutual interest of both Marsel and I. But then, of course, more and more and more as well. And that is all you need to hear from me. Hang around to the end of the chat to hear my afterthoughts, and also for me to explain what my ambition is for this podcast. And with no further ado, here is the photographic Dutchman, the master himself, Mr. Marsel Van Oosten. Good morning, Mr. Van Oosten. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really, it's my absolute pleasure. I came across your work as I was doing some research on sort of different wildlife photographers to try and draw some inspiration and maybe learn some lessons as to how I could create my photos a little bit differently. And then I came across a few of your shots, such as Facebook Update, for example, and I realized, oh, holy hell, this is one of those photos that hundreds of millions of people have seen, inadvertently now and again. And yeah, some of your photos really are just drop dead gorgeous, amazing. So it's really cool to get to talk to you about all of that, how you got there, how you do it, and so forth.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind.
But to make a rather awkward transition, I'll start somewhere else. Can you talk to me about the time you witnessed a pride of lions kill an elephant?
Oh, yeah. Let me think, how long ago was that? That must have been 2007, I think. Yeah, we were in Botswana, and it was raining cats and dogs. We were on a game drive, and there was not many people in the park actually. And we were driving along, and then we approached the waterhole. So we saw a single baby elephant standing at the waterhole, and we were like, "Where's the rest of the herd?" Because it's very unusual to see that. And then as we looked to our left, we were still driving. We saw a whole bunch of lions lying in the bushes, all spread out. And before we knew it, they all ran towards the baby elephant and jumped on it, and started killing it. We expected to see the rest of the herd running back and come and save the little one, but that didn't happen. And then what followed was a very gruesome, probably 1.5 hours or something before they actually managed to kill that baby elephant.
It was a 1.5 hour struggle.
Yeah, because even a baby elephant is still quite big, and it's difficult to. You can't choke it. A lion will usually go for the throat and then try to choke it, but with a elephant, that's too much throat. They can't really close that off. So then they have to close off the trunk, but then it still has the mouth to breathe. So it's it was very painful to watch. But then again, that's nature.
That's nature. I can imagine definitely painful to watch, but you guys stayed there and watched nonetheless. Was it out of a sort of morbid curiosity, or was there a chance to make it artistic almost?
Well, it's. I mean, that sort of scenes, as hard as it is to watch it, it is ultimately what nature is all about. Huh? It's kill or be killed, and we don't see most of it. There's a lot of these kind of things that happen at a very small scale, like insects. They're doing it all the time, killing and eating each other. And if we see a bird picking up a little bug, then we're not freaked out at all. It's only when the victims start getting a little bit bigger, and especially when they're more charismatic, then suddenly, our brain starts to play tricks on us, and then we're suddenly really upset. But there's not a lot of difference, I think, between an elephant being killed by a lion, or maybe a bird being killed by some other predator.
Yeah, I suppose. There's still... I wonder, maybe this is a stretch, but your favorite authors is Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, so you clearly have a very evolutionary worldviews that we are just animals not so separated from those on the savannah. We just have maybe a better intellect and developed a little bit some more advantageous genetic traits. I wonder.
Yeah, the opposable thumbs also greatly helped, of course. Yeah, but I agree with that statement. Yes. Yeah, I think we're just better evolved. Well, maybe not necessarily better, but we're just more evolved. And I think we're just lucky that we were the ones that drew the how do you call that, the longest straw. So I think in the end we're just lucky to be the ones that came out on top. It could have been different, if that meteor hadn't hit the Earth and the dinosaurs didn't die off. Who knows what might have happened?
The game of wildlife photography would be a whole lot more interesting.
Yeah, definitely more dangerous.
Yeah. But, it's just, as someone who, I'm probably projecting too much of myself here, but, many, many other young guys and girls around the world who sort of look up to and try to emulate what other great wildlife photographers are doing. There's the anecdotes of the danger involved, the anecdotes of being so close to the animals involved. I mean, you've been charged by lions, hippos, elephants. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of, whether that is a thrill that you enjoy, or whether that is a downside of the craft, exposing yourself to that danger? Is it something you actually enjoy? Because I get the sense that that's part of the thrill of doing this type of work, in a sense.
Well, actually, no. I think I speak not only for myself, but for almost all my colleagues, is that those dangerous situations, we actually desperately try to avoid that, because we don't want to end up creating a situation where the animal feels the need to charge us, because once that happens, usually we can only blame ourselves. So it's up to us to create an environment where both parties feel relaxed and don't feel the need to get stressed out or attack. So we always try to avoid that situation from happening. However, I mean, it's wildlife, so we have very little control over what happens, and all the animals are also individuals, so they all have different characters. So the one lion is not the other one, and elephants the same. So even though we try, it doesn't always work, because you don't know what that an elephant might just have experienced something really traumatic. It might just an hour before it might just have been charged by lions, so it's like really stressed up. And then when I appear and I do everything according to the rules, still that elephant might charge me. So it's just something that we have to always be prepared for, and that's why we pay a lot of attention to the animals and trying to read their body language, because that's usually you can usually tell a lot by looking at how they behave, whether they're relaxed or stressed out. So as soon as we see that the animal is not relaxed and it's really responding to our presence, and very often we decide to leave it alone and move on.
How do you, just as a friendly piece of advice to someone who ever gets in that situation, how do you react when you are, say, charged by a lion, a hippo, a rhino? Is it just run away, or are there special things to do?
Well, it really depends on the animal. Some animals, it's best to just run as fast as you can, and some other animals, it's better to not run at all. So, for instance, if an elephant charges you, you should never ever run, because it will just make matters worse. So you should just stand your ground and stand tall, wave your arms, use a loud and low voice, just to tell the elephant, I'm not not afraid of you, and stop what you're doing. But if there's a hippo running towards you, you better just start running.
Bail as
too.
fast as you can.
Yeah. So it really just depends. And with some animals, it's just very difficult to predict what's going to happen. Almost all animals give off clear signs that they're about to charge you. Whereas, for instance, a Cape buffalo does not give up of any warning signs whatsoever. Nothing, zero. They just go from seemingly relaxed to a full-on charge, and so that's why buffalo is the animal that most guides fear the most in the wild, because of that. Yeah, so they're not afraid of lions or leopards or even most elephants, not really. But it's the buffaloes that they're scared of.
Having been in these various areas so many times, like you've probably clocked up hundreds of safaris in the same areas. Are you on a first name basis with some of these big animals? Like some of the big tusters, you can recognize them, they recognize you. Animals who you might come back year after year, month after month and see. Do you feel like you have these sort of personal relationships with certain animals on the savannah, I suppose, or out in the parks?
Well, if you say relationship, that only works if it's like a two-way thing. I don't think that there will ever be something like that, because they're wild animals. So I may recognize, especially elephants. Sometimes you just recognize because they have certain specific features, like a tusk that's really recognizable, or like scars. Same with lions. Sometimes they have just these features that are easily recognizable. I know that from the snow monkeys in Japan that I've photographed a lot. I recognized quite a few of them every year, again, because they just looked a little bit different from the others. With the tigers, I have the same thing. Can also recognize a lot of them easily. But most of the animals I wouldn't actually recognize them very easily. They look very similar. Huh? So and I'm also too focused, I think, on the photography part, and I'm just spending so much effort into thinking and analyzing what I'm doing that very often I'm not paying attention to the small details on the animal itself, I guess.
So was it the inspiring mountains and drama of the Dutch countryside that developed your romantic love for nature? Where did this come from?
I don't know. The only thing I know is that when I was little, we used to watch a lot of nature documentaries. So whenever there was something on television that had animals in it, we as a family would watch that. So as I grew up, I guess that's how I learned to really appreciate animals. That has just always been there, but not. I didn't realize it very much until much later during life. We also visited zoos very often with family. So usually in the weekend we either went to my grandma's or we went to a zoo somewhere, and so always liked animals. But it wasn't until I started doing photography that I realized that that's actually the subject that inspired me most.
It's interesting for me, and I'm sure for other aspiring photographers, to see how you transitioned into it becoming a self-sustaining venture. So for so many years, your advertising career supported your photography passion. Were you confident the whole time it was all going to work out? And do you remember a moment when you realized that your dream of having this work sustain your lifestyle was going to pay off?
No, not at all. It was not like a one moment where everything just happened. This just gradually developed. So when I was in art school, I had the option of taking photography as one of my majors. But at the time I was totally not interested in photography at all, because all I thought about was having to spend countless hours in a dark room messing around with chemicals and film and stuff, and didn't appeal to me at all. And so that's when I decided to do graphic design and art direction instead. And it wasn't until I started working in advertising that I got exposed to photography more, because as an art director I was responsible for the visual part of the advertising. So I was the one who had to select photographers who were going to photograph my concepts, basically the ideas that I created with my copywriter. So that meant that I suddenly had to study all these different portfolios and the work of all these different photographers and figure out which style was most fitting to my ideas. And then I spent a lot of time working closely together with a ton of different advertising photographers, ranging from car photography to lingerie photography to whatever. It's like you can't think of it, and I've done advertising for it. So by working so closely together with photographers, I really started to learn a lot more about photography, and also started to appreciate photography much more. I started to enjoy it actually, because I could see how it was done and I could see the effect of it, and it was just super fun to come up with an idea and then pick a photographer and then together work on that idea, and then in the end it resulted in something, how do you call that, tangible, something real that you could see. So literally visualizing ideas, and that was a lot of fun. And at some stage, I bought a serious camera myself, and that's when I started to take photographs myself. Sometimes just during the weekend, and I started bringing my camera on vacations. And then very quickly I started realizing that my photographs actually pretty much sucked. And and that was a frustrating moment, because I had learned in my as an art director, I had learned to analyze images and to see which one would work and which one would not. So I was pretty good at telling whether a photograph was good or not. So then to produce photographs yourself and look at the results, and then constantly have to say like, well, that's pretty crappy. and that's when I decided to actually start learning more about photography. So then I started to pay more attention even during the shoots. I started asking questions to the photographers that I was working with. I started paying a lot of attention during the post-processing, the selection process. And then I started buying magazines. So just photo magazines, the ones that have technical explanations in them, with pictures next to it, and trying to understand the basics of photography, basically, because that's the one thing that was really missing thus far. Was I knew what a good photograph should look like, but I had no clue what technical skills you needed, or how to actually operate a camera. Yeah. So then I decided that's something that I should really learn. And as I learned more about that part, I started to really enjoy the photography more, and started photographing more, and basically started photographing everything. I was like a photographic omnivore. And then the moment that I decided that I wanted to do wildlife more than anything was on our honeymoon. So when my wife and I got married, that was in 2001. We went on a honeymoon to Tanzania, or Tanzania, as some people pronounce it. That was my first safari ever, and that made such a profound impact on me. That's the moment I decided, this is it. This is what I want to do a lot more of. So from then on, my focus narrowed to wildlife, basically. Wow, that's a very long answer, and I haven't even answered it completely yet.
Oh, but there's so much in there, Marcel. So much good stuff. I don't want to distract you too much from the main thread of that, but as an art director who critiqued so many different types of work, and not just exclusively in wildlife as well, as you said, think of it, and I've produced some sort of commercial for it or advertisement. Can you give us some examples of what works and what doesn't when it comes to a photo? Now, obviously it's contextual, but as you're sitting there right now, there must be some things in your head that are immediately deal breakers. So what works and what doesn't when it comes to a good photo?
Yeah, so the difficult thing is that from my perspective, the kind of photography that I do, I consider it an art form. So already that means that it's entirely subjective as to what is good and what is not, and what attracts me or what pleases my eye may not be what pleases someone else's eye. And so that's already a hard thing to say. However, for me personally, there's a couple of things that were very important when I was still an art director in respect to the ads that I created. And there were certain laws, basically, or rules, that were really important. And one of them, for instance, was that nobody has asked for your ads or your commercials. You know, you're an uninvited guest. So that means that you have very, very little time to introduce yourself and very little time to grab the attention of whoever sees your ad. So in that extremely short time, you have to try to either surprise them, grab their attention, and try to communicate something to them. And that already means that whatever your message is, that it has to be short, it has to be unambiguous, and it has to be interesting, you know, and entertaining maybe. And that's in much less even than half a second that people usually glance over an ad. So in terms of the art direction part, that means that, for instance, the graphic design had to be very simple and clean, because less is definitely more in advertising. You want to have a single-minded message, as simple as possible. You have to just narrow it down to that one tiny little thing that you want to communicate, and strip everything else, and then focus solely on that. And that really matches with my character, because I'm very much a less is more character. I like clear choices, and I like cleanliness.
Like minimalism.
Yes, minimalism. Yeah. I can't show you my house because I'm now in a sort of a closed-off area, but like super clean in our house. There's no books, no bookshelves, there's no plants, there's no colors. And it's entirely black and white and gray, and just clean. Everything is focused on lines and shapes. Mm-hmm. So, and that's also in my work as an art director. I was very much focused on the concepts, on the ideas, and form follows function. And then in my photography, I basically still use the same techniques or tactics. So I always try to make it as simple as possible and get rid of any kind of distractions. That is probably one of the things I spend most time on, getting rid of distractions. So already in the field, that desire to create something that's hyper clean, that determines where I actually go and where I don't want to go. So location wise, and so for me, a good photograph, whether a photograph works, is if the photograph is single-minded. Now, if it's immediately clear what the photograph is about. A good photograph for me has no distractions, so that my eye is not seduced into wandering into all kinds of corners and areas in the image that have no value. So that's really important to me. And also separation. So for me, separation is super important. So if I photograph several subjects or elements I have in the frame, then I go through great lengths to creating separation between the subjects or between the different layers, so foreground, midground, background. So it's all. It all has to do with creating a visual hierarchy. So I want, if there's one thing that's important in the photograph, then that means that I don't want anything distracting from that element. And so that's how I select images, and that's also how I process the images with that in mind. Yeah, well, another thing that's really important is the idea that's behind the photograph. So the best ones, I think, the best photographs, they feel that they have a certain uniqueness to them. So that there's like this element of surprise in it, either because of the subject itself, or because of what the subject is doing, or because of the angle or the viewpoint or whatever. There can be a lot of reasons, but it's really important, I think, to at least try to create something that is different, even if it's only like 1% different from what's already out there. And this is probably the biggest mistake that starting photographers make, that in the early stages of their career, they're too much focused on copying instead of exploring.
It's so great that you added in that end the element of surprise, whether the subject is rare and that's a surprise, or whether they're doing something surprising. Two of your most notable photographs, the Golden Couple and Facebook update, in one of them, the animal is doing something completely surprising, and then in the other one, the subject is itself a very surprising animal. Yes. And so that sort of speaks to that right there immediately.
So yeah, so that's thank you for mentioning that, because that gives me the opportunity to say something about those two things, because those two images are very famous. And I would argue that the monkey with the iPhone is the much more famous one, because that actually went viral all over the place. Viral. Yeah, very viral.
Potentially hundreds of millions of people saw that photo.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one was because it won me an important award. But even so, for me, there's a very, very clear distinction between those two images, because one of those images I'm really proud of, and the other one not at all.
Yeah.
So the snow monkey with the iPhone image I'm not proud of at all. I'm very happy that I was the one shooting it, but I'm critical enough to realize that that's really a shot that anyone could have taken, like literally anyone. You just you just had to be there and witness that, and then point your camera at it, and then press a button. And so I'm never trying to make that story bigger than it is, because I just happen to be at the right time, at the right place, and know what to do. And the other image is the opposite of that, because that's actually an image that I pre-visualized, that I created in my head when I was still at home, and then tried to photograph a scene like that as I had envisioned it. And I actually took a lot of work and a lot of planning to get that shot. So that is actually a shot that I'm very proud of, and I think rightfully so, because it's also one of a kind, but it is one of a kind as a direct result of my creativity, whereas the other one is not. And so I prefer images where I can clearly see the thinking of the photographer, where I can see, oh wow, he or she did something really clever here to get this image. And most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time it's just like, oh wow, this photographer was really lucky to get this scene presented to him or her, and lucky to be there at the right time, especially with wildlife photography. Yeah.
You are very classically humble. The Dutch humility shines through. But I would say that not anyone could have taken the first photo, because there is also this notion of serendipity. You were conducting a photographic tour, so you were already putting in lots of hours to master that craft, and you had to have the right equipment, which probably not everyone there had that day, but you also had to know how to operate that equipment like the back of your hand, because if I remember reading about the photo, it was extremely hot, so your lens kept fogging, and you also needed to get your lens as close to the water as possible to create the nice angle. Now, it's not like nearly as technical or as impressive as what you did with the Golden Couple, But still, not anyone could have taken that photo. And so if you know, outcome is just luck versus where luck meets opportunity, right? It's a lucky moment, sure, but you still had to capture it and take full advantage of it. And so I disagree that not anyone could have taken it. It really, only a few people could have. You just happened to be the guy that was there when it happened.
Yeah, well, that's probably true, but still, I think it's more healthy for myself to just stay like super critical, and just when I analyze that shot, it's just not something that I can be particularly proud of, because especially from a creative point of view, there's nothing that I added except maybe a little bit of fill flash that helped, but there's not something special that I did. So again, I'm super happy that I shot that, because it's unique, it's one of a kind, and it makes people laugh, and it's done me a lot of good. But it's, you know, it's if I were to have a portfolio that's full of that kind of shots, I would just not. I know I wouldn't just not be happy. No.
Also, just to speak more about what does and doesn't make a photo, is there, and forgive me if this is too much of a stretch, because it very well could be, but are there certain traits of a photo that through our evolution we are more likely to respond to? So for example, big eyes that are sharp as hell looking directly into the lens, we know that that will trigger more of an emotional response in the viewer than if, say, the eye was looking somewhere else, or even if the eyelid was closed over. So that's a very obvious one, eyes, because we respond to eyes. Is there other factors and elements of a photo that we are more likely to have an emotional response to, that, you know, me and other young photographers can try and capture, or that you think about? Right?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes. And I'm thinking of too many things right now. So before I give the answer, what's important to realize for starting photographers is they have to ask themselves who they're photographing for. So, for instance, when I was still working in advertising, the question that you just asked me was a very, very important one, because if you have less than half a second to communicate to your potential customer, you need to be really, really certain that when they look at your ad, that they understand it and that they feel a connection. So that's when you start to do a lot of research as to where are people looking, and I've seen tons of research like that, like what is the best place for a logo, you know, what's the worst place for text, and etc., etc. So being very aware of those things, I could have decided in my photography to also use that information. However, the problem becomes when you're starting to use that kind of information just because you want a lot of people liking your shots. And if that's what you want, the only thing you need to do is just open Instagram and scroll through your feed, and it is very easy for everyone to see what works, what people really like. And so with wildlife on Instagram, for instance, it is absolutely true. You started with the big eyes. So on Instagram, just tight portraits work extremely well. There's one guy on Instagram that shoots only like tight portraits of monkeys. For me, as a professional photographer, it has zero artistic value, because every shot is like a mugshot. It's like the monkey is like really close in the shot. Just the way we're seeing each other now, and most of the time it's the appeal is just because it's an exotic species, and there's not much really special about it. But it works because you know it's like a full-on headshot, and the monkey is looking you straight in the eyes. So if that's what you want, if you want to be the most popular photographer, then that influences your thinking, and the way that you work, because then you have to first start to think, what does my public like, and then you're going to shoot that. I think that's very unhealthy for an artist. So I think it should be the other way around. You ask yourself what you like and what inspires you and what you're passionate about, and then you're going to photograph that, and you're going to photograph it in the way that pleases you the most, totally ignoring what other people think of what you're doing. And if you do that, it is much more likely that you'll create something that is original, because it comes from your heart. And it may mean that you will not be as popular as someone who only photographs kittens and puppies, because those people will likely beat you in terms of popularity. But it's it's just a matter of what you want, and what kind of career do you want. So, but to go back to your question again, to your answer, it's the big eyes. It is high contrast is more popular than low contrast. High sharpness is more popular than low sharpness. High saturation, super popular, as opposed to low saturation. So that's why if you compare the most popular black and white images on Instagram with the most popular color images, the difference will be humongous. It will be out of this world.
In favor of color.
In favor of color, yeah. If you look at the most popular landscape photographers on Instagram with like a million plus followers, and you'll see that they all have the same things in common. They share this. Their images share the same characteristics, and that's high sharpness, high contrast, high saturation. So the more saturated and dramatic your skies, the more people are gonna like it. And that's actually a segue to another subject that you can write down, because then we can talk about that later, maybe the influence of social media on photography.
Cool. If you feel like tackling it right now, go nuts. Otherwise we can save it for later.
Yeah, no, let's do that then. So what happens with especially a medium like Instagram is like, let's say you're a beginning photographer and you want to create a following, you want to become more popular because maybe you want to make photography your day job. So you're following all these photographers, and every time you see one that you like, you follow that person, and then every day you start scrolling through your Instagram feed, and you see all these amazing photographs, and you like all of them. And then you see below the photograph, you see like, this one got like 20,000 likes, and that one got like 30,000 likes from people who have like 1 million plus followers. And after a while, what will happen, because that's just how our brain works, is what you're seeing will just occupy a part of your creative brain space. And in that little brain space, that what you're constantly seeing, it will be normalized. That will become the norm. And the next time you're processing your images, it will be very hard for you to resist the urge to process your images in exactly that way, that way that you've seen being so successful for other photographers. And then you see how they're using light, how they're using contrast, how they're using color, and so for example, I won't mention any names because I don't think it's necessary. But there's like a landscape photographer who shoots all his daytime shots where there is like a blue sky, or like half clouded, puffy white clouds and a blue sky, and he makes all that blue, he turns it into like some sort of steel blue, so like very desaturated blue. And
dramatic.
Yeah, like desaturated and darker than like in reality I mean, that would never occur in reality. It's just impossible. And the rest of the image would look very natural, like very oversaturated, of course, and super sharp. But those blue skies always like fascinated me, because I was like, why? I understand why, but it was just something really, something that most people didn't do. And then after a while, as you would expect, you see other photographers doing that as well. And then now we've reached a stage where like a lot of the landscape photographers, when there's like a sky that's not like sunset or sunrise and has some blue in it, then that blue tends to be like heavily desaturated and darkened to get that same look. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about what I call the unconscious brainwashing that happens when you spend a lot of time scrolling through your Instagram feed, that you'll be exposed to so many styles, and it will just inevitably influence your own styles. So I'm personally very careful with how much time I spend on social media, because I've noticed it a couple of times. I'm processing, and then I'm like, I wonder what it would look like if I do this, and then I realize, oh, the only reason I'm actually thinking about trying this is because I've seen it before. I've seen that. I've seen the other people doing that, and that's usually when I stop, and then I ask myself, like, well, is this something that I really want, or is this just going to be like a fashionable thing that I'm going to do only for like
get the likes
a year, and then I'm hopping onto the next thing. And that's what I think is really important. We've had the period where everybody was using the so-called Instagram filters, all these looks, and it's getting less and less now. But there's still quite a lot of people that do travel photography, and even some wildlife, that have these very, very heavily filtered images that still seem to appeal to a very large number of people. Whereas if you were to analyze the actual photograph, you would realize that the photograph itself isn't that special at all. It's actually very, very straightforward, and all the effect is gained through heavy, heavy filtering. So that's so the effect of Instagram or other social media that involves images is that it creates all these like fashionable styles and people all jump on the bandwagon and start to copy that, and then a year or 2 years later everybody moves in an entirely different direction again. And you don't want that, because if you want to look at your own portfolio, you should be able to see your own personal development, and not like, oh, this is when I jumped onto this. I don't know the word for it. It's not a different word for fashion. Hype. Yeah, hype is the word.
It's definitely true that social media just further embellishes our sort of species. No, it further embellishes our love for survivorship bias. We see and act upon survivorship bias everywhere. Just because a popular Instagram account starts doing X type of filtering, now we're going to try and copy, because we know that might, be able to get us some sort of likes. And like you say, with this landscape photographer who made the still blue skies, and then other landscape photographers started following him. There's, it's kind of an inescapable reality of the social media though, isn't it? Because most people's best, by far, exposure to the random world, like the serendipitous world where some art director or someone who's looking for a photographer might find them on Instagram, it becomes this almost necessity to do what you can to get the bigger follower count, to get the bigger like count, and so forth. And that's it sucks, but it's just life, isn't it? Like that's the reality. That's the slog that I suppose you have to go through. And if you're brilliant enough to really differentiate yourself and still get the likes and followers, then I mean, that's amazing. But I wonder, and this is also, again, I might be grabbing at more than I should, but don't we sort of also instinctually not respond that well to hyper edited, hyper saturated photos? Because we know that in our lives, we've never seen, you know, a mountainous foreground with an animal in front so clear and as well pictured with our own eyes. And so we kind of don't believe it as much. I'm not sure what you make of that, but there's a part of me that thinks photos actually perform better, not necessarily on Instagram, but maybe in a gallery. They perform better if they're more realistic. If the viewer can say, wow, like I could have seen this exact thing in my life. Whereas if it was hyper edited, they'd be like, a computer made this. This wasn't actually captured in the world. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I am. Yes, I do. I do understand, and I agree. I think it has to do with context. So on Instagram, for instance, because it's, let's be honest, it's a ridiculous medium for photography. Because it makes no sense how small the images are on there. You would expect the most important platform for photographers to show the images at a glorious size instead of these pathetic thumbnails. And yet there we are. And the thing is that an Instagram feed, people are scrolling through that, and the images are so small that if you want to stand out, you know, you have to be, your image needs to be screaming. It needs to be screaming for attention. And screaming is loud colors, and it's high contrast, lots of clarity, and in-your-face subjects. So it's the entire context that determines the popularity also of a certain kind of image. And I agree that completely different rules apply if you were to create a portfolio for a gallery, for a physical gallery that has like very large prints, because then that would just look horrible. All those oversaturated images that you see on Instagram, I don't think that would work. It would just be like, well, your crazy uncle in his Hawaii shirt. You know, it's just like too much in your face. But yeah, but again, it depends on what you want to do with your photography. So if you're a photographer who just wants online fame, then for me it's very clear what direction you need to go. Yet if you want to be like the photographer who sells limited edition prints at a very large size, yeah, then you need to do something completely different.
Let's talk more about the post-production, because it seems like in your career, from film to now, how do you think about post-production, and do you do it all yourself as well?
Yeah, so the analogy that I often make is that of a professional chef. So for a photographer, you know, it's important that you get the best on location, and you get like super high quality image. However, usually that's just more or less a copy of what you've seen, because that just tends to be the thing that cameras do. They make a copy of what you're looking at, and it is during the post-processing time that you're really gonna add your own spin to it. You're gonna add your own recipe. So, like I said, with a chef, the same. You know, a chef will buy the best ingredients, like the best piece of fish, But that chef will not then just throw that fish in a pan and then cook it and then serve it to you, because there would be no art in that. It would just be catching a fish, cooking it, and putting it on your plate. So what a chef will do is he will add certain herbs and certain spices and a special sauce, and it's the combination of those little tweaks that make that fish into something much more than just the fish. And for me, post-processing is exactly the same thing. I also want to have the best quality ingredients, so that would be my raw file. But then during the post-processing, that's when I start to tweak the image a little bit, and I try to make that image the way that I like it to be. And that's usually not exactly how I saw it. So that might be as simple as just making it brighter or darker, but it can also be increasing or lowering contrast and all kinds of selective adjustments that I can do. And so for me, that's a super important part of the photography, because that's where I make the image my own. And before the post-processing, I usually don't feel like the image is mine. I just feel like it's just been out there, and I just grabbed it, and then I still have to make it my own.
Nice. Bjorn Persson said that the raw file is the canvas, and then what he does with it after is the sort of the art, the painting, so forth. I really like that cooking analogy. Are you doing it yourself, and is it Photoshop and Lightroom that you're using?
Yes, I do everything myself, and it is Lightroom and Photoshop that I'm using, and with a bunch of plugins for certain things that I want to do.
This is the thing that I am just so weak at, is making... I can see the raw file, and I can see in my head that's how I want it to look. Recreating that within the application is... I don't know, it's obviously a learning curve, right? It's not something that is impossible. It's something you can get to, but it is just like I don't know, it's a frustration, isn't it? You know, because you know how you want it to look, but you can't necessarily do it. And
yeah, I know very much. I know very much how that feels, because when I was in art school, one of the things we had to learn was drawing. So then we would have drawing lessons, and then we would be in this one room, and there would be like usually an overweight model, naked, in the middle. And we got our charcoal or whatever, and then we had to get going. And then an hour later we had to show the results, and I royally sucked at drawing. I was just so bad at it. I could see it, and then for some reason my hand would just not be able to draw what I was seeing. Whereas most of the other students in my class, they were amazing at it. And so it's just that's hard to learn. I still can't draw. So for photography, I think those are really two different disciplines. How do you say that? You know? So the photography is one thing. The post-processing is an entirely different thing that requires a completely different skill set. And so to master both of them that's not easy. And I would argue that the photo taking part is actually the easy part, and it's the post-processing part that's the really difficult part, because that's where you need to be really creative and really have like a vision working towards that.
Yeah. So we've inadvertently been speaking the mechanics of photography for a while. So I have a few more on that, and then general questions, and then the economics of photography. So
Right.
take me behind the scenes of taking some of these shots. So just off the top of my head, I remember the golden couple, it required you sort of strategically following them for a while. It wasn't necessarily where you could just set up and forget it. I mean, David Yarrow talks about predicting the movement of animals, and he has some photos that he's taken with pre-focused remote control cameras that he'll then take from a distance. But then Bjorn Persson, the other week, was telling me about how one of his best photos he took from a Jeep just because the animal happened to come up at the perfect time. But then he's also crawled under the nose of a rhino to also take photos. So there's a gamma spectrum of how it can be done. How do you do it, and how do you think about it?
With regards to that golden couple image of the two golden snub-nosed monkeys, I should actually start taking a few steps back, because that's actually the most important part of the picture taking, and that's the part where you're still at home. That for me is always the most important part of the entire journey towards the image, because when I'm still at home, that's when I start pre-visualizing, coming up with ideas. And so for this specific species, for instance, I did a lot of research to find out, okay, where do they live, and how do they behave, and what does the habitat look like, and what kind of images are already out there. This is one of the most important questions to ask, what's already out there, because if you want to make it as a photographer, you need to create content that is fresh. So if you find out that your subject has been shot to death already, that's going to make it super hard for you to create something that has a feeling of uniqueness to it. So already at home, I did a lot of research, and then I realized, I'm lucky because not a lot of people have photographed this species before. So that gives you like a blank slate almost. The other thing that I realized, and this is why it's important to be very aware of your own aesthetic preferences, is that these monkeys live in rainforest. So it's like dense foliage. And being as allergic to distractions and clutter as I am, that presented a major challenge for me, because usually that's so off-putting to me that I decide to not photograph a certain species just because I don't like the habitat, and I already know that whatever I'm going to shoot, I'm going to be frustrated because of the lack of simplicity and the abundance of distractions. So I really had to think very hard about how am I going to manage this nightmare of a habitat, and that's when I decided, okay, I'll have to create my own light. So I have to try to control the super high contrast that forests usually have, especially when there's bright sunlight. So I need to reduce the contrast, I need to get rid of the brightness in the background, and I need to create my own light so that I can create more separation between foreground and background. So, and then by studying the animals, I realized that the most glorious part of their body is actually the back. They have these really long guard hairs on the back, and I really wanted them to stand out. So then my plan was to go to China, follow them as much as I could, and use off-camera flash from like a sharp angle, and hopefully on the back of a monkey with a monkey looking sideways, and meanwhile using my exposure to lower the ambient light and make the flashlight more dominant. And by doing that, I would have more control over the habitat, basically. So that's how it started. And I think that's really important, because for me it meant that even though I had never been there before, the moment I got to that place, I already had a plan. I knew, okay, this is what I'm working for, and this is the technique I'm going to use. This is the gear that I'm going to need for that. And after that, it was just, you know, trying and trying and trying to get something that looked the way that I had pre-visualized it. And that's how I prefer to work. So the idea is leading, and pre-visualization is the most important creative tool that I use for that.
So in that specific photo, you actually had someone else administering a flash from another angle to highlight the back. Yeah,
yes,
wow. So that really is making a photo rather than taking a photo, that famous distinction.
Yeah. I'm very fortunate to always be traveling with my wife, Daniela. So we're a team. So whatever I do, you know, she's very important for that. So we always work very closely together. And the obvious benefit in a situation like that is that I can use her as an assistant, basically, because if you can't do that with a light stand, for instance, it would be too not flexible enough. So then she's holding the flash for me, and I just can tell her hold it lower or higher, or use a different angle, etc. While I'm checking the results, I can make small adjustments to the flash output, and so there's a lot of variables when you're doing something like that, and it can also be quite stressful, I think, because if you're only using ambient light, there's only one thing that you need to do: just keep looking through your lens and keep watching your subject, and press the shutter when something interesting happens. But the moment you're doing something like this with off-camera flash, becomes way more complicated, because there's a ton more things you constantly have to think about, because you have to think about how the light is changing. So you have to make adjustments for the ambient light, and then you also have to make adjustments for the flash output. You have to look at the exact angle of the light. So. But in the end, you know, it's a lot more fun to work like that than to just move through nature like a copy machine.
Well, yeah, but it's also, I mean, that's also the level of professionalism that gets you that type of photo, right? I mean, the type of resources, the access, the fact that you're a Nat Geo photographer, like all of that comes into being able to be in that moment there, which is truly amazing. Just a very specific mechanical question, which will, if the audience hasn't already been isolated, there'll be furthermore. But can you talk about ISO? So you shot this golden couple at 1600 ISO, and I've always been told by professional photographers to keep it as low as possible. Now, clearly you're in the bush, so you need to pump it up a bit. But was that you just through the rangefinder finding the ISO that works? Or was that you knowing beforehand exactly what the 1600 is going to give you?
Well, in that particular location, the forest was quite dense, so it was actually quite darkish. So in order to get a decent shutter speed, also I was shooting handheld. I tend to shoot with relatively high ISOs because I just don't want to risk having any motion blur, and cameras nowadays are so good. You know, the sensors are amazing. All my Nikon cameras, whether it's a D850 or my Z7, at super high ISOs, they still perform very well. As an example, there's one photograph in my book of a leopard drinking. If you look at the EXIF, you'll see that I shot it at I think 51,800 or something ISO, so just ridiculously high. Yet it is it's printed in a large format in a photo book. I think it looks pretty good for ISO that high. So I would say that ISO 1600 is not actually that high at all. If I go on a safari, my default ISO is usually already 800, because I know that gives me high shutter speeds. So if something suddenly jumps, on my left, and it happens to be like a super shaded area in the early morning, then that's not going to be a lot of light there. But I have to be fast, if I want to get that shot. I don't want to be messing around with ISO. So that's a little bit of a compromise. But at 1600 ISO, you still don't see any noise. It's obviously a little effect, so it affects color saturation a bit. So you lose some saturation. You get the characteristics of your pixels look a little bit different, but that's a compromise that I'm very happy to take, because it makes my life
That's interesting
so much
to
easier.
hear. It's great as well. It's contrary to everything I've been told, because I've been walking around, say Sweden right now. It's extremely dark, so if there's a cloud over the sky, I mean it's really dark. So I'm walking around 1200 ISO thinking, damn it, I don't want to pump it up too much more, because all my professional advice so far has been to keep it as low as possible.
Well, I should add that there's quite a difference between, for instance, shooting a landscape or an animal is totally static and you have the time, and trying to be prepared for something that might happen, or trying to shoot something that's just very fast. And on a safari, you just have to always be prepared for the unexpected. So that's why I prefer to have the high ISO. However, when I'm shooting landscapes, I'm shooting the lowest ISO that I can shoot, because that means that I just have maximized my dynamic range and capture as much noiseless information as possible. But it's especially with the wildlife that I'm not afraid. If you were to flip through the thumbnails in my book and look at all the EXIF information, you'll see that I use 1600, 3200, 6400, quite a lot actually. Yeah.
The biggest variable for these great photos, well, maybe not the biggest variable, but a massive variable, is like distance from the animal. And so that's kind of what I was trying to get at before. The closer the animal is to the lens, the more we are going to instinctually respond to the photo. Again, coming back to what do we respond to when we see an eye, but also if we can tell it's in front of us. So how do you think about this variable getting as close as possible to the animals?
Well, I think you need to distinguish between getting as close as possible to the animals, whether you're talking about physically getting closer to the animal, or getting the animal as big as possible in the frame, because those are two different things entirely.
No, I'm talking about distance, physical distance.
Physical distance. Well, I'm not I'm not sure whether I agree, because I think what the physical distance, what it does, if you're super close to the animal, even if you're not a photographer, you'll instantly feel that you are very close to the animal. While that certainly can have its charms, it can also destroy the feeling of wildness, because with a lot of animals it's just not very natural to be so close to an animal. So if I have a super wide angle lens, a super wide angle shot of a polar bear, that it won't feel wild. It will feel like you shot it in a zoo, because that would be the only place where you could get super close to a polar bear. In real life, you would never get super close to a polar bear other than with a remote controlled camera. So as a photographer, you need to be very aware of the effect that your physical distance to the subject has, as well as the effect of each focal length, because it will have an effect. And most of the time it's subliminal, so subconscious. People won't really pick up what causes this effect, but they will feel it. And so I would argue that it's not necessarily the case that getting closer to your subject makes the image more impactful. It will just tell a completely different story, and it will communicate a different kind of feeling. So to add to that, for me, the main reason to want to get closer to an animal is to be able to use a shorter focal length. And I don't want to do that to get a more in-your-face shot, but I want to do that to be able to include more of the habitat or more of the sky. Because the longer your focal length, the more you lose of the habitat usually. Not only in terms of the amount of habitat that you'll be able to include, but also how that habitat will look like. Which means with a long lens, the habitat will usually be reduced to either a blur or something that's very, very out of focus. Whereas if you try to shoot the same scene with a short lens and ending up with the animal the same size in the frame, you'll have a lot more habitat in the background, and it will be a lot more sharp.
Yeah, so it is just it's a balance, right? Whatever the individual photo is you're looking for requires the different attention to how close you're going to be and so forth.
Yes.
Marcel, I'm interviewing as many photographers as I can, right, for this podcast, and I'm all asking them this same question, and I want to be able to see at the end what the most common responses are, or what it sits in and so forth. So, if you could give a percentage allocation on a pie graph to the following ingredients for what makes a great photographer. So just 3 components, percentage allocation on a pie graph: research and access, the equipment, and then the eye of the photographer.
I don't understand why the first one is combined, research and access.
We can make it separate. So 4 components.
Yeah, so research, I would say 75. Access, you need to define for me what you...
So access, for example, you're a National Geographic photographer with lots of resources. You can say, go walk in Cameroon and take photos of silverback apes if you really wanted to. That is not possible for me, just given limited access, limited resources. So access and resources are one and the same, but also the fact that you're a Nat Geo photographer is huge access. So think about access like that. Your ability to going to Antarctica, for example, that's very limited access. So how important is access and resources? Consider them the same.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Can I only say a number, or can I also explain afterwards?
Of course,
Okay.
Yeah. Explain away. But it would be nice to get the numbers.
Well, for me personally,
yeah, it's what you think.
Being the photographer that I am and what I like to do, access is super important. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do what I do. So I would give that like, I don't know, 80%. Yeah. However, when I just started as a photographer, I didn't have all that access. And I just, you just have to work with what you got. And you just have to come up with all kinds of solutions, and you start differently. So when I was just starting in photography, I did a lot of photography in zoos. Or I just photograph, animals close to home. I shot a lot of cows even. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't really matter because that's good practice, and even though most wildlife photographers will make a very clear distinction between wildlife and animal, how do you call it? Farm
Zoos
animals.
and cows, yeah.
Yeah, but farm animals, I never really understood why, because to me they're all animals. So I don't see why, it's being. I could not enter a photograph of a cow into the Wildlife Photography of the Year awards, and I think that's just absurd. Anyway, so I could take a lot of photographs of cows, horses. I actually follow one photographer on Instagram, maybe even two, that create this amazing photographs of horses. Every country has horses. You can just go, somewhere where they have horses, and you can just go crazy and try to create something beautiful. So even though I'm shooting what I'm shooting and I'm going to all these places, doesn't mean that this is something that I knew that I was always going to do. This is just something that evolved over time. And I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't had the resources that I have, or the access, as you call it, I would have come up with a different solution, because that's what creative people do. They look at their options, and they look at the parameters and the limits, and then they just come up with an idea. And if it had not been possible for me to go to all these places to photograph wildlife, I'm pretty certain I would have just moved into a more landscape-ish sort of direction and spend a lot more time on landscapes. And so while for me it is really important, this doesn't apply to everyone else. Even not to me 15 years ago, it would have been different.
Nice.
Sorry, that's a very long answer, but yeah.
No, but it's nice, and it's also an inspiring message as well, because only the tail end of the distribution really do have that access. The rest of everyone in the middle is finding the same animals.
and it's a critique that people like myself often get. And it's usually the same. It's usually but for you it's easy because you can go to all these places and get these photographs. And that is very limited, very narrow-minded thinking. I follow a guy that does macro photography, even though I hate macro photography myself, but he creates the most amazing stuff, and it's all like right where he lives, and absolute art. And he doesn't have to travel at all. He probably never even leaves his own province. But yet he's found something that he is really passionate about, and that's all he needs. And I think that people, instead of looking at it as a problem that they can never solve, just keep looking at opportunities, keep looking at ideas, to just do something else, because otherwise you'll just end up super frustrated, and you'll always be saying, well, this Marsel guy, and he always goes to Antarctica, and I can never go because I don't have the resources. Yeah, that sucks, but that also goes for me, because if I see someone driving a beautiful car, and I'll also say like, well, why is he driving that car? I'm on my mountain bike. That's that's not how you should live your life. I think just you should look at everything as an opportunity to come up with ideas. And all right, next
beautiful.
one.
Beautiful. So round it out then for us. Equipment, eye of the photographer, research, access. How do they fit on the pie chart?
Okay, so then the next one is equipment. I think equipment is probably like, let's say 30.
Okay, 30% equipment.
Yeah, maybe 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 20. Yeah, it's so. While having good equipment definitely helps, it helps you to bring something that's already good, maybe to being something that's maybe a little bit better, or it helps you to get images that would be a little bit more difficult with equipment that is not as sophisticated. But in the end, the equipment is not important at all. That's just a tool. And it's basically like saying to a painter, like, oh, wow, that's an amazing painting. You must have like a really good brush. You know, that makes no sense. And it's the same for me. If you give me the cheapest Nikon with a kit lens, I will still be able to do exactly what I'm doing now. It will probably just take me a little bit more effort, and but it would not make a whole lot of difference. And so that's why I'm always telling people that ask me for advice on equipment, especially for starting photographers, please do not spend all your money on getting the most expensive bodies and the most expensive lenses, because that's just a waste of money. It's better to spend that money on a course, or go on a photo tour with a photographer that you admire, that you can learn from, because that's so much more valuable than just a tool, and so that's why that percentage is rather low.
Rather low, yeah.
And then the last one is the what did you call the creative eye? Yeah, the eye. Yeah, that's it. But that must be 100. That's the most. That's the most important thing.
I'll just say we've ended up with 280%. So I'll ramp that down to fit it into 100.
Okay, so that means that the eye is 100 and all the other three are 0.
It's nothing. Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say then let's then make the eye 75, and then make the resources maybe let's make it like 20, like low. So then we're already at 95. Huh?
Yeah, so we just left 5.
Oh, you do the math.
It's good. I'll figure that
do
out.
The math. So the resources and the equipment and that's all trivial compared to the eye. That's the most important thing. And everything is about that. How you as a photographer look at things, and every photograph is the result of a million tiny little decisions, and that's basically what it all boils down to: making the right decisions. And because there's a whole list of decisions you have to work through to get to your photograph, whether that is what you're going to photograph, why you're going to photograph it, when you're going to photograph it, when and where and how. Those are all very important questions, and the answers to those questions determine where you will end up and what you're going to shoot and with what and what technique, etc. And so it's basically just making a whole bunch of decisions, and it's all done in your head, and has nothing to do with money or with gear or whatever. It's all part of the creative process. So that's the most important thing, and that's why I always tell people that they should spend a lot more time thinking before they start shooting, because that will result in better and more original photographs.
But let's talk just very briefly about the economics of photography, because creating artificial scarcity is something that's really interesting to me. How do you price it the right way? How do you distribute it the right way? So I noticed that you have a limited edition photo book. You sell your prints as fine art on your website. I assume you're cooperating with many galleries around the world. Talk to me a little bit about creating artificial scarcity and getting the price right.
So this is actually a very difficult topic, because that was something that puzzled me and confused me greatly when I just started in photography, because you're creating something that has very little value other than what you decide the value it's going to be. I found that very difficult in the beginning, because you can make it whatever. You know, I can decide tomorrow that I'm gonna increase my print prices tenfold, and that would be perfectly fine for me to do that. But the question is, just like in advertising, what kind of product do you want to sell? Do you want to be available to a lot of people, that a lot of people can buy your art, or do you want to be like the Louis Vuitton or the Bentley of wildlife photography? And that's up to me to decide that. And for now, I've just always decided that I didn't want to be like the Bentley of wildlife photography, because I just wanted to be that, well, to price my art in a way that other people can also afford it. And I might change that, I might not. I'm not sure.
And just to understand that, you mean if you were the Bentley of wildlife photography, you would create limited edition prints, way less editions, and much higher prices, versus what you're doing now, which is more prints but at a lower price for access to the regular person. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I would do, because in the end, there's a million products that you can come up with that are like super high quality, yet they're quite affordable. Like Toyota, for instance, you can't break a Toyota; it will just always run. So, in terms of value for money, everybody should just buy a Toyota. However, a lot of people will, well, not a lot, but some people will just buy not a Toyota; they'll buy Ferrari, even though we know that they're not as durable and they're very expensive to maintain, etc., etc. But it's some people just want to buy expensive things. And Louis Vuitton is the best example, I think, of something that is not only ugly, but like horribly overpriced, and it makes zero sense whatsoever to spend thousands of dollars on a small handbag that looks hideous. But yet people do it because they're tricked into believing that this is the most exclusive thing that they can buy, and that it will enrich their lives. But no,
because they mastered the artificial scarcity,
Yes.
I forget who said it, but it was basically, there's no margins like luxury fashion.
Yes.
And the same could be said for the highest end of art as well. If you can position yourself in this super scarce, high status, limited edition, wow, look, I have a Paul Nicklin hanging on my wall. It can become this type of,
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I don't know what the most expensive photograph is that has ever been sold. I think it was like, I don't know, 2.5 million or something. I don't even know. I think it was contested, right? I think it was Peter Lick, and it was. Yeah, he was the first one, I think, that sold something for $1 million. And I think that.
Oh, okay, so it's gone up since.
Yeah, that image was called One, I think, and it was. I know Peter a little bit, but in all honesty, I don't think that anyone should pay $1 million for an image like that. To me, it didn't make any sense, and I've still struggled to understand why.
Artificial scarcity. Really?
That's it. So that's why I said it's basically just saying, okay, this photograph is the Louis Vuitton of the Bentleys, and it's like super scarce, and yeah, I know I'm too rational for that kind of thinking.
Yeah, which is good. Though you do exist in a field that is subject to that type of thinking, right? And it's something that I really do think about a lot. How do you find the right pricing? And if you take the ethical considerations away for a moment and just think about what is your maximum revenue you can make. Like, imagine the Facebook update photo. Now, many editions have already been sold. But imagine you took that and you said, you know what, I'm going to do limited 10 editions. This photo that's been seen 100 million times across the world. You know, it could feasibly be one of these $1 million photos that gets printed, blown up, and, you know, put on the wall of some tasteless, you know, businessman, right? Theoretically, it could, that could play out like that. And I just find it fascinating to ask someone who's in the situation, how do you deal with it and how do you think about it, you know, which I know you've already said, but nonetheless, that's why.
Yeah, so and some too much, too down to earth, and being Dutch, I think also, yeah, you know, I don't think I could ever sell something for a crazy amount like that. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror, I think, to do that, unless I would think that I had really created something that is not only unique but also like important. So that if you know, you can imagine if you were the only photographer in the world to get a photograph of I don't know, some president getting shot, something, you know, that is, and you're the only one to get that, then well, that's an important part of history, and so being the only photograph, yeah, that makes it super valuable. But with art, I mean, it will always be difficult. You know, some paintings are being sold for millions, and then there's a lot of paintings that I think are much better.
Crap. And there's crap that sells
crap,
for millions and millions and millions of dollars.
And then there's beautiful stuff that it's. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So
yeah. Unfortunately, beauty doesn't dictate the price. It really is. It always just comes back down to this random status, artificial scarcity.
Yeah, and that's something that I really struggled with when I was in art school, because being as hyper rational as I am, it was really difficult to be in art school, because there was just so much bullshit being taught and being discussed. You know, and I was constantly like, seriously, are you really? But so I guess that's also one of the reasons why I've ended up doing what I'm doing, and that I'm not like turned into like a painter or something like that.
Just speaking exclusively in emotional language.
No, yeah, that I find very, very hard. Yeah, I like to talk about ideas. And not so much about emotions, because it's, you know, it's super personal, and that's just no.
I wonder if I could ask you one more dirty economics question. Basically, from your experience, 20 plus years, you know, at the top of the industry, how do you see popularity for photographs changing, photographic books changing, and for photography in general? Are there like large trends that you can see just through conversations you might have with people and with National Geographic and so forth, and maybe Nikon? Like, you might be getting signals that other people might not be able to see?
Well, obviously photography is developing like super rapidly because of social media. And so if you compare photography now to like I don't know when Facebook started, it was like 2000
5 I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that was entirely different ball game. That was just people who really liked photography that were photographing, and then with social media, it was different, and suddenly you got a lot of people interested in photography, not because they wanted to photograph, but it was just to be more popular, basically, and get likes and followers. So I think that has greatly influenced photography as a business. That there's a lot of copying going on in photography. There's a lot of more traveling because of social media, because everybody wants to go to the most remote and beautiful areas, most exotic locations, to take photographs there, and again to get more likes and followers. So the whole idea behind it, how do you call that, the engine that's running it is different. The motivations are different. At the same time, what I'm seeing is what I've predicted a long time ago. That is that video will eventually take over from photography. So I actually think that photography, as we're still doing it, will become less and less and less, and it will, especially for the wildlife and action sports photographers, will move towards video much more, because you'll just be constantly videoing instead of taking photographs. So you'll never miss a moment. We already have cameras that shoot more than 24 frames per second, and 24 frames per second is video. So I think we're getting to the stage where you're basically shooting video, and the technique is already there, where even when you're not shooting, the camera is constantly recording and then discarding the material that is shooting after like 10 seconds. So even pressing the button too late doesn't mean anything, because you still have it, because the camera is running anyway. So that technology is already out there and it's already being used. So that will also go into like consumer electronics. And then you see also on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, you see everything is focusing on video. And Instagram is pushing video, and TikTok and Snapchat's all video. So this entire young generation is growing up with video, and I think we might end up with a generation that doesn't easily get excited anymore about anything in particular, but especially not with photographs. So I think that photography might be too boring, maybe. People that have seen everything. They have seen all the exotic locations in the world. They have seen all the animals in the world, and it will be too difficult for people to get excited about a photograph. So then they'll still get excited about stupid things, like someone in a penguin suit doing a strange dance, in front of a camera. And I think that's going to excite people more, because they've seen everything already. Either that, or photography is going to move completely in a direction of where everything is so heavily manipulated that it's going to be very, very far away from reality. I don't think we can continue doing what we're doing like forever, because people, their attention span is already getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So I don't see how in 25 years people will still, look at an image the way that they're doing now.
That's really interesting to hear. I think you are probably right, or almost certainly right, in that fact that everything's moving towards video. But I just wonder if there is ever going to be something that will replace the image on the wall. The artwork on
but
the
it
wall.
will, because it's already happening. Because it started with those tiny little photo frames that you can plug into your computer, and then you can load up like 100 images. So that instead of having that one single image in that frame on your, how do you call that, cabinet or whatever, shelf.
Frame.
And instead of that, it's going to change like every 10 seconds, because God forbid that you'll get bored looking at that same picture. So it's the same way that people are using the television. There's already companies out there. Actually, I've been contacted by one of them that's just an app you can install on your TV, and you can leave your TV on the entire time. And as TVs, the size of TVs is growing rapidly. So instead of having that black screen there, you just have like all these beautiful images from professional photographers, and it's just constantly changing. So I think that's what's going to happen, because why would you have one image constantly on your wall? At the same time, you could say, you know, in the evening I would like to have this image because it's more subdued in colors, it's darker. And when I have friends over, I want to have this image.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's going to happen because that technology is going to get cheaper and cheaper and more accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of a depressing dystopian outlook too, because I can also completely imagine that same digital frame which you hang on the wall, sits in your TV. It will eventually just play short videos as well, almost on a loop. You know, because if you're just going to be, I mean, you're a product of your environment, right? And if you most of the time is watching short videos on TikTok, I like how you called it Tic-Tac, by the way, or Instagram or something like this, then yeah, you're already primed for that type of entertainment or that type of, you know, background imagery to be hanging around in your house. And
Yeah.
I mean, advertisements, as I'm sure you know, they've moved to a lot of video, and like places where they used to be stationary. At bus stops, I'm watching videos. On the bus, I'm watching videos.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
shorter. Although videos and commercials are getting shorter and shorter and shorter because they realize that people have a very short attention span, and everything has become on demand. So people have no patience whatsoever. This is a good thing for people like myself. You know, the wildlife photographer needs to have a lot of patience. And but the way that people grow up now, it's they have zero patience. So yeah, everything has to be fast and changing constantly. So that will have an effect. If you look at old movies, even like 20 years ago, it's not that long ago, but if you look at those movies, they're painfully slow. You know, like, really, come on. And so that means that we as people, we're getting more and more used to things going fast. If you look at video clips, how fast they're edited, as opposed to like 30 years ago or 20 years ago, everything was slow, painfully slow. So I think this will continue. This will develop. And now I don't think if all the images in my house were replaced with videos, it would drive me crazy, because it would be just, you would feel restless. But maybe people in 30 years will be totally fine with that, because they're used to constantly be bombarded with small video clips all over the place, and I think that they'll probably be fine with it.
Yeah. I wonder as well if you could give an insight into National Geographic. How has their readership and their engagement changed and maybe dropped off or increased in the time you've known them? Because that might be a good high-level signal to say what is going to happen to attention to wildlife, or to,
Well, I think that if you look at the magazine, I think they've really stuck to what they've been doing and what they've made them great. I mean, they've just diversified into doing more things, like doing TV, doing documentaries, and having a very strong presence on the internet. But at their core, they're still doing the same thing. So it's still very high level of journalism. Not so much the pure art, but like sticking very close to reality, whatever that is. But like, really, they want to be the trusted medium, so that people can trust that whatever they're seeing in National Geographic has not been doctored and is actually something that happened. And this is very important to them. So this is what they're going to stick to, I'm guessing, forever. And this is entirely different from what you see happening elsewhere. So if you look on social media, actually it's moving the opposite direction. So it's very hard to tell what is real when you go on Instagram. And for people like myself, it's very easy to tell whether something is real or not, because of my knowledge of animals and my knowledge of how light works and how the weather works and that sort of thing. So if I see a photograph with a very big moon, and the moon has clouds behind it, it's it's that giveaway that that moon has been pasted in the sky. But if you look at the comments of images like that, you'll see that people don't know. They just look at, oh wow, that's so beautiful, and then later they find out that they've been tricked into thinking that it's real, and that's why National Geographic is like, you can trust them. That what you see in the magazine is usually it's something that's important and it's real, and they've done that in the most artistic way within their very tight parameters that they've set up. So even though they use my work every now and then, I am not a National Geographic photographer in a sense that I directly shoot assignments for them. And there's a reason for that, because of what I just explained earlier. They are way more conservative in the post-processing part than I am. Mm-hmm. So I would not feel comfortable getting my images published without me being able to fine-tune them and make them 100% me. And even though it's usually tiny little things that I would like to tweak, those tweaks are very often already outside of their limits. So it usually works the other way around. They ask me whether they can use a certain image, and then if that image is, say, very close to what I shot, then they can obviously use it. But quite often I've done something to the image. So for instance, if I clone out a tiny little branch that sticks into the frame, that for me that's a no-brainer. Of course I'm going to remove that because it's distracting and it serves no purpose. So from an artistic point of view, there is zero reason for me to keep a distracting branch in the image if it looks much better without it. But for them, that is already crossing a bridge that they don't want to cross. Because for them they say, well, then it becomes a slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? The next photograph you might say, well, I have 3 monkeys in this shot. I only want to have 2, so I'm just going to remove 1. And that turns into an entirely new discussion about what is truth, what is reality, what is art, where do you draw the line, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And that would take another 3 hours.
Though I do think we've kind of addressed those questions throughout, to be honest. Yeah. Look, Marcel, I have a number of questions here for you. I wanted to start with your adopted home, South Africa. So this isn't a photography question. You might have seen that this podcast is more geopolitically focused, right? The photography angle is kind of a new direction. But how optimistic are you about this country's future? And I'm, really leaning into the politics of things here. How is it to live there at the moment? Because I saw earlier in the year and in 2020, lots of really distressing stories coming out of South Africa, but, it's hard to know how dramatic it all is. So I'd love to hear what you think about it.
Yeah, so when we decided to move to South Africa, we were very aware that this country has its problems and challenges. But because we travel so much all over the world and we go to a lot of different countries, we realized that every country has its problems and its challenges, and whether it's whether it's China or Turkey or Iran or South Africa, they all have serious issues that they have to deal with, and South Africa is no different. South Africa has a very problematic history, and luckily that has all been changed. Still, a long way to go, I think. But it's also a very big country, and the one end of the country is completely different from the other part. So, for instance, where I live, it's near the coast. It's quite relaxed and chill. But if I were to live in Johannesburg, it's completely different there. It's a different way of life, and but yeah, so we're happy where we live for a lot of reasons, and it's not only the weather. I mean, you've lived in the Netherlands, so you know how it is there. So it's not always very pleasant, and we prefer the mentality here. People are more friendly. There's a lot more nature here, which I obviously like very much. So we spend a lot more time outdoors here than we have ever done in Amsterdam. It's cheaper here, so it's a long list of reasons, and for us it was a no-brainer to move here. And I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to people. So I'm not very hopeful.
In terms of you just have low expectations of them?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. So I think we're just, as a species, we're just extremely selfish and short-sighted. And we're very clever, but we use that cleverness always too late. So because of our selfishness, we first let things escalate, because we just don't like to deal with the problems because it's too much effort or it costs too much money. And then when it totally goes out of control, that's when we use our cleverness, and then we come up with all kinds of solutions. But by then, usually we've already caused a lot of damage and destroyed a lot of stuff. And but we're reaching the point where I think that's going to go faster and faster. The rate of destruction in my book. I also talk about that because everyone is so focused on climate change, and the destruction of the rainforest and that sort of stuff. I agree with all that because I'm also concerned about climate change, and I'm also concerned about the fact that so many species are being threatened with extinction or endangered, losing habitat. But for me, the main reason of all of that is overpopulation. There can only be one reason for me, and that's it. It's just there's way too many people on this planet. But that's the elephant in the conservation room that nobody wants to talk about. It is completely off topic. But realistically speaking, if we had if world population would be halved tomorrow by some catastrophic event, we wouldn't be talking about climate change anymore. We would not be talking about habitat loss for animals, because suddenly, people would have a ton of space. The resources would be enough, and we would not pollute as much. We would not, animals would have more space to wander into. Basically, everything would be solved with less people on this planet. But it's the big taboo. We cannot address it. Whereas if you ask the statisticians, the people who know about these kind of developments, that they have been warning us for decades, and it's looking very grim. The population on the planet it's growing rapidly, and to make matters worse, populations are growing the fastest in places where the problems that are caused by population growth are the biggest. So that would be like Africa, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa.
Lagos, Nigeria, one of those crazy places.
Yes, Nigeria is going to be the second or third biggest country in the world in terms of inhabitants.
Population.
Population. And they're already struggling. There's already so much poverty. And to look away from that, and the cognitive dissonance that is ruling the planet, it just baffles me. I just can't understand why we're only focusing on more solar panels or more wind turbines and want that, but it's in the end, it's we're all in the Netherlands. We say you're chasing after the facts. So you're always one step too late because you're not addressing the real problems. So I'm not. So I'm not very hopeful.
Yeah, well, lovely optimistic message, Marcel.
Yeah, it's always nice to finish off with a...
Yeah. What about, did you watch or read the book Inferno by Dan Brown?
No, I didn't, no.
No, okay. So the villain in that book devises this virus which would essentially wipe out half the humanity. And I don't know how sophisticated it is, but there is a really interesting discussion in the book over the merits of it, because you have to make the decision. Do you think that he's making the right choice, or do you think he's making the wrong choice? Ultimately, it's the wrong choice. You don't want to get rid of half the population because that entails getting rid of half the population. But there might be some optimistic news on the horizon for you. If you think about global birth rates, since the 1400s, it's been on a very steady incline. But in the last few years, you look around to most of the developed parts of the world, especially Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, parts of North America, birth rates are not only flat, but they're also negative. So there is a real shift in the amount of population coming to these areas. And if you live in Europe, as you did in Amsterdam, you lived in Museumplein, how crowded it can be in some of these places. So,
but those also tend to be the least problematic areas in terms of overpopulation, and also
so
the
it's
richest,
being counterbalanced. Exactly.
So
by Africa.
Because it's not only Africa. There's also huge parts in Southeast Asia that are still booming, like Indonesia. That's growing and growing and growing, and they keep chopping up that rainforest like nobody's business. I don't see that stopping anytime soon. And then so all these people, there's going to be more problems there. There's going to be more poverty, and there's going to be more people that want to escape from their countries and they want to migrate to other countries, but they don't want to migrate to a neighboring country because it's just usually has the same problems. So they'll want to migrate to, richer countries, and we already see that happening. You see that in the United States, where there's a constant stream. They did a survey in South America, and they asked that if the United States were to open their borders, which actually a lot of Americans think that they should do, which is, I think, complete insanity. But it's like more than a third of South Americans said that the moment they opened the borders that they would go to the United States. But if something like that were to happen, that would be, you can't manage something like that.
No, you can't. But there's borders for a reason, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but we see that happening all over the place, and all like North Africa, we see all those little zodiacs with too many people trying to escape the poverty in Africa, and they're all moving north. And I think we are the cause of that, because we could have helped them, we could have solved a lot of problems, but instead, we're too much focused on ourselves and on our Louis Vuitton bags and on being comfortable, and we don't want to make a lot of sacrifices. It's like a festering wound. If you don't give it the proper care, it will just get worse and worse and worse. So that's my rather grim prediction for the future. We're doomed.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not doomed, but I think you are. So I think similarly to you in terms of maybe a more grim outlook for Africa specifically, because, like you've said, the population growth happens in the very places where it just cannot sustain it. And I wonder in my lifetime your lifetime as well, forgive me, I wonder how it's going to, how it's going to develop. I'd be fascinated to know, but you're, extraordinarily well traveled throughout Africa. So I imagine you'd have a pretty decent sort of, taste of things. Is there parts of the continent that give you optimism? Are there certain countries that you think, wow, these guys are doing a really good job?
Well, I hate to say it, but it's yeah, the situation is not very good, huh? And it's especially if you there's two ways of thinking. Two ways of looking at it, and the popular way of looking at the situation in Africa is to say all the problems in Africa have been caused by colonialism. This is the popular opinion. So they need our eternal help. It's basically that's the solution. And the other way of looking at it is that if you look at all the governments, you're basically looking at hyper-corrupt governments that usually consists of a lot of nepotists and that are being bought by a country that I shall not name. But that entire continent is just being bought by one country. France?
France is not the country you have in mind? You don't have to say it. No, okay. Oh, it's China. Of course it is. Yeah, sorry. Forgive me. Yeah.
And they're just stripping the entire continent of its resources, and they're just paying all the governments, and the governments are only focused on themselves, not on their people, and it's a tragedy because a lot of those countries are actually very rich, potentially, so they have a ton of resources, and the people in those countries should have good living conditions, and theoretically this is possible. But it's because on a governmental level, the wrong decisions are made like constantly. The one dictator or wannabe dictator is just being replaced by another one that's only after enriching himself and his friends and family, not giving a damn about the population. And I think that's the real problem, not so much the history. It's that. And, I don't know how you can solve it, because if you want to intervene, you can't because of history. Usually the governments don't want your so-called help because they're too proud.
There's a fascinating book, such a good book. It's called Blood River by a comrade of yours in South Africa, actually, called Tim Butcher. So he was a foreign correspondent for the BBC for the longest time, and I really highly encourage you, as someone interested in the continent, but also anyone interested in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also Africa more generally, to read or listen to. It's a fantastic book. He goes and travels across foot, east to west, the journey of the DRC, which hadn't been done for 500 years or something. Whenever the Belgians first came into the Congo, it had been done on foot, and he recreated the journey. And it's such a great book because his journey was significantly harder than it was for the Belgian who did it hundreds of years before him, because there was no infrastructure. He was taking these extremely dangerous journeys on motorbikes between towns where before there was a railway line or before there was a road. And if you just, for me at least, someone who's never been to Africa, well, I've been to Morocco, but I haven't been into South Africa. For someone who's never been there, it was so interesting to hear an explanation of that specific country's history and how the kleptocracy just destroyed it, or the colonial influences destroyed it, or whatever reason. They're all contributing factors, right? There isn't one reason. But how it also works as an archetype for a lot of other nations in Africa, and how their development's been stifled. I highly recommend it to you. I think you get a kick out of it. Super interesting book, and you might even be able to reach out to the guy. He lives in South Africa.
Okay, good tip. Thank you.
Yeah. On the you brought up China. I have an ambition to create a photo book of China in Africa, because I'm just imagining it would create for these amazing visuals. But it's also a great opportunity to tell a photojournalistic story, because it's such an important thing that's happening in this continent that people kind of know about on the periphery, but the implications of which are not fully understood. I mean, it is another type of colonialism, because once those resources are gone, they don't just come back. So
yes, that's true. But what's interesting is that So the morally superior, they will want to look away from that, because the self-hatred is so huge that they want it to be all about us and not about some new influence that is doing the same thing. And yeah, it's astonishing. And like you said, we've traveled to so many countries in Africa, and you see the same thing happening everywhere. You get out of the airport in Zimbabwe, and the first thing you see, like literally the first thing, is like a massive, massive billboard with Chinese characters on it.
Really?
And
Wow.
and it's basically just saying thank you to our Chinese friends for building this airport, you know, and that's everywhere. Outside on the airport, you know, there's lots of just Chinese characters. No one can read it except for the Chinese. But even when we were in Libya a long time ago, all the infrastructure was done by the Chinese, and they have a very clever way to work, because they just say, okay, we're going to help you with your infrastructure. We're going to build your railway lines. We're going to build your roads. The only thing we ask in return is that whatever we find, like a kilometer to the left and a kilometer to the right, that is for us to do what we please with. And obviously they already know that when they're building that road, that there is something really interesting somewhere, like some precious metal or something. So those roads and railways will inevitably like move into those directions. So that's literally all major infrastructure projects, whether it's also housing, like huge buildings, airports, all that stuff. It's all the Chinese do it, and we see it in a very small scale. Also, for instance, when we do a certain tour in South Africa, and every year we drive through a tiny little town, and that town had like 4 like tiny supermarkets, and then one year one of those supermarkets suddenly had a Chinese couple running it, and we're like, wow, that's it. You instantly noticed it. And then a year later, that other supermarket also had a Chinese couple running it. And that's when, you know, when I started to put it together. Like, yeah, this is how it works. You know, that just small bits, you know, everywhere. You know, shop here, shop there, and then. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, because I always want to.
But
I also want to base all my decisions on reason, science, and logic. But this is just something that we see happen like all over the continent. So it's something we cannot ignore. And then
but
when
it's
you
not
think
a
of it,
conspiracy. I mean, it's.
it must be the strategy, because I mean, let's face it, that country is full. China has so many people living there. So the amount of resources that they need is just mind-boggling. So they'll have to like move into other territories and make sure that there's a steady flow of resources. There's already these huge trawlers that go up and down the east coast of Africa, emptying the ocean there, because there's not much left in their own ocean. So.
Right. I'd love to learn more about this. Are you familiar with people who are doing good work, reporting on these issues? Or is this all just anecdotal experience for you?
No, this is just pure anecdotal. This is just from just going to the same places like constantly and seeing what's changing, and just noticing that, you know, there's 0 Western companies doing anything in Africa. That's all China, and I can understand why. Because I understand why, because from a Western perspective, look at what we're doing. Even with China, we want to do business with China. What do we say to China? We want to do business with you, but you first have to address these human rights issues. You first have to, you know, these Uyghurs, or however you pronounce it in English.
Uyghur, yeah.
You know, So you have to fix that. You have to fix that. And Chinese are completely different. They don't care. they just, they go to this government in Africa and they say, this is what we want. And they won't ask for any government changes or for any political activists to be freed from jail. But this is exactly what Western countries do. And they obviously come across as extremely arrogant. And why should we listen to you? As that this is an internal matter, and you have no say about that. And that makes it a lot easier for African countries to deal with countries that don't care so much about those issues.
I could really talk to you about China and geopolitics of China all day. But perhaps we should save it for another time, because I do have a few more questions for you, and I would
like to add though that I've been to China several times and really enjoyed it, and I think that the Chinese are very friendly people, nice people, had many good encounters, very cheerful, etc. So by saying what I just said, I don't mean any disrespect to the people themselves. We're just talking about geopolitical
of course,
strategies.
And there's a giant difference between the CCP and China's people. There's a huge difference. It's everything.
That difference couldn't be bigger. And we see the same thing in Iran. I mean, we've been there a couple of times. And the difference is so stark, you can't put it into words. It's not the same thing. And it's unfair to the people, because when you say I'm going to Iran, people are like, oh wow, isn't that dangerous? I said, well, it's not. There's a huge difference between the government and what the government thinks and what the government does, and the people themselves.
Yeah. So much of the planet has been beautifully photographed. You yourself have traveled to most corners of the globe. If you were to just pull out a map of the world, where is somewhere that you can point to that hasn't been captured brilliantly? I'm thinking like Australia-ish, maybe Mexico. But if you look at a map of the world, do you see a place that is a great opportunity to have good photos taken?
Okay, so I'm really reluctant answering that question, because I know for a fact that when I answer this, then it will inspire people to investigate those areas, because I definitely have a list in my head of places that I want to go to and I want to photograph, and based on previous experiences, I know that when I communicate that, there will be other people who think like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'm also going to investigate that. And before I know it, then there's already other people that are doing the same thing. Because, like I explained earlier, the idea is super important. When you're a creative person, it's all about ideas. And so, if you have an original idea, it's critical that you keep it to yourself, and otherwise, it's like the iPhone. You create something unique, and what do you know? It takes less than a year, and then the biggest competitor made something that looks identical, and cheaper, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So, well,
fair
enough.
What happens, and we especially had to deal with that a lot with our photo tours. So we've been running photographic tours for 15 years now, and our objective was always to create original journeys for people to exciting new locations, doing exciting new stuff, and that's not always easy. And then we noticed that as soon as we set something up and that was really popular, then in no time, it was incredible. Just people started copying it, and it was just so annoying. So that's when I started to be a little bit more careful with what I communicate, and we go through great lengths actually to keep it a secret for as long as we can.
If I can rustle together 10,000 euros, I'll join you in 2023 in Iran as well. I saw that on your website. It looks amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing, and that is actually one of those countries that is like really undiscovered. We've taken our guests to places where I'm like 99.9% sure that no one has ever photographed before, because it's just so ridiculously remote, and it took us so much effort to find. And a lot of people think that everything has already been photographed on the planet, but it's absolutely not true. It's just the accessible and easy stuff has been photographed to death. But beyond there is that there's a whole world that you can still discover, but it just takes a ton more effort and to get to those places.
That's why I think Australia could be a not necessarily completely uncovered rock. I can't point to beautiful fine art photography of kangaroos, for example. And there's no reason why they can't be captured in an extremely aesthetic style and way.
Are kangaroos considered wildlife, is my question. Or are they all domesticated?
No, they're famously impossible to domesticate. So, yeah.
I know nothing about kangaroos, so hence the stupid question.
I'll give you the skinny then, if you're interested. Are you interested?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the reason I know this is because for a brief period, I thought my business was going to be exporting kangaroo meat to China, but it kind of all fell in itself. But basically, in my research of these animals, I learned that they're a type of rodent, right? So they're a descendant from the sort of hamster, the rat, etc., the marsupial. Their population estimations vary, but most confidently people say it's 60 million of them, which means there's 3 kangaroos for every person in Australia. They are famously impossible to domesticate because they're so good at jumping, and their tails are so strong that they can get rid of fences. They whack down fences and then jump over them. They're pests, they eat everyone's crops and harvest, so it's actually legal to hunt them like at all times and hours of the day. There's no sort of limit on how many you can kill. There's no obligations as what you should do with the body afterwards. And so you really just can drive through graveyards of kangaroos if you know someone who's got a property that has them, which is quite horrible, to be honest. It's really horrible. And if you ever are in Australia, by the way, yourself, Marcel, but also if someone's listening, and you find a ball sack that's been converted into a bottle opener, or paws that's been converted into a bottle opener, this is because some Chinese people have gone down the highways and chopped these things off and then mummified them and made them into like tourist trinkets. So it's a very popular thing. You'll see like, the paw of a kangaroo with a bottle opener at the end.
Oh my God.
Yeah, seriously. So that's, just FYI, don't buy those products, people. But yeah, so that's kangaroos in a nutshell. I mean, they are the most Australian animal I can think of, really. The platypus is obviously also very Australian, but in terms of just what it represents for the nation. And so therefore I just think kangaroos could be done really well. They're very skittish. Humans, you can't get close to them. So I was thinking like if you could set up a remote camera and get them at a morning, I'm thinking it could be done. But yeah, Australia could be one of these places,
Yeah, it's on the list because it's the only continent I've never been to. So.
Oh wow, well, that's a surprise. Well, you'll love it. It's very similar to South Africa, apparently.
Yeah, so there's a few reasons it's not at the top of my list, and one of them is that I haven't seen a lot of photographs from other photographers that really excite me. That I don't want to sound like arrogant or something, but it's just like I can get very easily inspired or excited when I see a beautiful photograph and I see not only the photograph itself, but just the subject matter. When it excites me, and I sometimes get really inspired, and I think like, oh, I can do this with that, or I can do that, and I can can give my own spin on it. And Australia, I would probably first go to New Zealand, to be honest.
Oh, mate, don't do that to me. That's nonsense. Australia is dripping in beauty. You'll find good stuff there.
Yeah. You're very objective, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, look, I'm looking forward to seeing, as the photos come out, these locations that you have in your mind, because although it's true that the world has been, turned over and had it's been exposed completely, there are surely still corners of the planet that have so much beauty that hasn't been captured yet, and I'd love to see what you end up finding on in that vein. When you look back on your career, actually, no, this is better. Given your notoriety as a famous award-winning photographer, National Geographic photographer, what is the most serendipitous opportunity that has come your way because of that?
What does the word serendipitous?
Serendipity is like a chance encounter for the upside. So, what's a good example? So, for example, you moving into your house in South Africa, your neighbor might happen to be some person who has like perfect access to an animal that you wanted to photograph. The fact that you randomly met this person is serendipity. And the fact that you're a National Geographic photographer means opportunities would come your way. What's the most amazing one, basically, if one stands out?
Jeez, that's actually a very hard question. I have to really think. I don't want to disappoint you because it was a very original question, but now I'm like thinking of an answer, and I can't really come up with something.
But that's okay. There's no pressure. If nothing pops out, then that's probably for good reason, because it didn't stand out as a really.
Yeah, or maybe I just blocked it out, or just forgot about it. I don't know. I can't really answer it now.
But the word serendipity, just FYI, it's a beautiful idea. That if you expose yourself to the world, and that sounds weird, but basically, if you put your work out into the world, for example, I discovered your work because of your website. That was a serendipitous encounter, for example, and the fact that you have so many photos that so many people might be touching across the world, it creates opportunities that wouldn't have been there otherwise. I'm maybe bundling it a bit, but this is kind of the idea of serendipity. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, okay.
Meeting your wife, for example. I don't know how you met her, but if you met her at a random place at a random time, how many alternative universes did you not meet her, right? But the serendipity made it so. So it's a beautiful type of upside of randomness.
Right. Well, I totally believe in randomness. I think everything is random anyway, and that's a whole different discussion. I think we have very, very little influence over what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great one. Are you familiar with Nassim Taleb?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Well, my other podcast is a Nassim Taleb podcast, exclusively his work. So you can see why I think we think very similarly along those lines.
Yeah. So one of the books that made a great impression on me was Free Will by Sam Harris. Yeah, and he talks about the fact that he thinks that people actually don't have free will. And before I read the book, I was like, that sounds like rubbish to me. And after I read the book, I was like, yep. Yeah, I don't actually think we have free will. We're just like, we're slaves to our brain. And our brain is just another organ that does all of these things. And,
If imagine your schedule completely opened up, you had no obligations, and plus you all of a sudden had access to anywhere you wanted and the best resources, what photo would you go out and take? And I'm sorry if this now overlaps with the previous question. I'm realizing it might, but in case it doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, too much overlap.
All right.
Yeah.
In that case,
I could try to make maybe in a more general way without being too specific.
That works.
Yeah. Well, The way that I work now is very much influenced by the fact that my main source of income is from running photographic tours. So that means that I'm the majority of my time I'm traveling together with my wife, hosting photographic safaris for small groups of people. And that means that even though I'm usually shooting alongside the people that we travel with, the way that I'm photographing is actually quite different from when I'm on my own, so when I'm by myself. So if, for instance, tomorrow I would win the lottery, I would be completely financially independent. We would probably still run a couple of tours just for fun, but then I would just spend a lot more time just by myself, and that basically means that I would invest way more time in less locations. So now I'm doing the opposite, because you have a limited time. People have like 10, 15, 14 days of holiday, so you want to give them a lot of variety. So even though everything is focused on photography and we're trying our best to let everyone return with the best images that they can possibly get, still, if I were to do the same things by myself, I would reduce the amount of locations drastically and pick maybe one or two, and then spend all my time on those one or two to really go deep in there, because I know for a fact that will give the best results. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but
100%.
Sort of.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I like the line, more time in less places. Really completely open up the potential of one area rather than the thin layer on the top.
Yeah, and you see the opposite happening now on Instagram. People are rushing. They're rushing from place to place, wanting to capture as many icons as possible. Oh, they see this photograph that's popular, and then off they go, all to the same spot, and get that one photograph, and then hop in the plane, and then chasing that next iconic shot. But it's missing depth, and that's another thing that I think that National Geographic is doing really well. They go really in depth, so they really turn the subject upside down, inside out, and get to the bottom of it, instead of just like any other magazine that would spend maybe 2 or 4 pages maximum on a subject.
Yeah. What's a moment in your life that you look back on and you just truly can't believe you are a part of? And tell me if you want me to give you some context for that, if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, sure, do.
Okay, so there's a guy called Lex Friedman. He loves martial arts, and he got to train martial arts with Georges St. Pierre, one of the greatest martial artists of all time. And he was there training with this guy, and he commented, "I couldn't believe I was a part of this moment. It was too surreal." He got a chance to train with the best of all time. So it's like a moment that you've been a part of, and that you look back at it and you just think, I cannot believe I was there. How did I get to be a part of that moment? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, that's one that comes to mind, and that's actually the moment that I won the Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. That was extremely surreal, and because when I started my career, if you start a career in anything, usually people have certain goals. So I had a couple of goals. One of them was to get a publication in National Geographic, and the ultimate goal I didn't even formulate. So I just wanted to have one image win a award in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, because for me that was like the Oscars. So that level was so high. I was like, if I ever managed to do that, then my career is a success. And winning the overall title has never even come up. So I've never actually made that like a goal. And so when I was there during the awards ceremony, and I didn't know that I was going to win that title. So when I won that, I literally was just lost for words. I don't think if you can, you would be able to find that back, because during the award ceremony, they called me onto the stage, and the idea is that I should say something to the public, and I can't. That was like a scenario that it had never crossed my mind, and so it was like I was not standing there. I was just an out-of-body experience, like standing there, all these people, a lot of photographers that I totally admire, and then trying to understand what just happened. And yeah, that was just one big, like, a haze, and took me a long time to grasp what happened. And I'm usually not that easily, how do you call that, phased. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of those moments where I think like, oh, I can't believe that happened. But obviously there's also things that happen just during my work. So on location, sometimes you witness something really special. I mean, even like that snow monkey with the phone. You know, if something like that happens, I was just so extremely aware of the importance of what was happening. I knew instantly, like, I better not screw this up, because this is going to be gold. Yeah, so I was like, I couldn't have been more focused then. I was like really 100% in that moment, and trying to capture that one shot that I managed to get. And mind you, I was not the only photographer there. Right? There was like, I think 7 or 8 other people there. And for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason it seems that nobody got that exact moment where it was holding the phone like a human. I've seen a lot of other shots from people that were there with me, but usually the phone is like half in the water, or like at a weird angle, or the monkey's not looking at it. So yeah, so those are moments that when they're finished, then you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that I just witnessed this, because you just realize how lucky you are, and the chances of something like that happening are actually very, very, very slim.
How did it's a beautiful way you described winning the National Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. How did your life change, and your sort of status within the photography community change tangibly? Like, was anything different, or was it just an amazing moment, but then back to the same stuff afterwards?
Well, obviously right after it was like a bit of a chaos, because then I had a lot of requests for interviews, and before I knew it, I was sitting at the BBC being interviewed, and Dutch television. I was like all over the place. So it was all one big roller coaster ride. But I must say, pretty quickly after that, everything went down to normal. It has been really good for my CV, obviously, and I've really enjoyed it, because it's quite the honor to get like the highest achievable that you can get in your field of work. So I was pretty humbled by that. And then, but what it did is fascinating, because after I won that title, I actually lost my interest quite a bit in entering competitions. So before that, I was constantly entering my work into competitions and trying to see where I stand, and also just as basically free PR. You know, every time you win something, then your name gets out there, which again is good for our business. But after I won that title, I lost a bit of the drive to keep doing that. I don't know. It's probably because I just felt like, well, you know, I just won the highest thing that I could win. So what's the point? So I'm still doing it every now and then, but I lost a lot of my drive for that. And other than that, nothing. That hasn't really changed me one bit, because in the end, it's just purely subjective, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people think like, well, that's a travesty. That guy won the won the award with those bloody monkeys, and it should have been that, or it should have been that. And they're probably right. It's an art form, so whatever wins, it's highly debatable whether it's actually the best quality out there. And so I'm not going to be the one that says, this proves how good I am. It just proves that, I was just maybe lucky that the judges that were there at that time just happened to really like my work, because let's face it, it's only like 4 or 5 people in one room. Maybe one was really dominant, he really wanted that shot to win.
Yeah, true. Maybe it just comes down to
totally dominated the other judges and said, well, we should do this one. Anything, I'm like I said, I'm a realist, so I don't, I'm very down to earth, and nothing.
But you're so
really
right. I mean,
changed.
art is subjective, and
yes,
whatever the mood was, whatever the theme, the trend was at the time, it rendered yours the winning picture.
Yeah, so that's why when people ask me like, how can I win an award? Then I always tell them, well, you should ask yourself why you want to win an award. What is your reasoning behind it? Because if you just want people to give you a tap on the shoulder and say, oh, well done, sure, that will work. But in the end, it's an art form, and it doesn't mean much. It's like what I call the Justin Bieber effect, Justin Bieber has a lot of followers and sells a lot of records. But like real people that know real music, I think they will all agree that it's maybe not the highest form of music. And same goes for Taylor Swift. I think Taylor Swift is
now you're getting yourself in hot water, Marcel.
almost sold as many records as Michael Jackson, I think, or the Beatles. It's getting close to that. So if you just look at the numbers, you'd be tempted to say, well, clearly it's just as good as the Beatles. But I would argue, no, maybe not. And it's the same on Instagram. People with 1 million followers, it does not mean that person is 100 times better than someone with 10,000 followers.
No, definitely not.
There's usually a ton of other reasons behind it. Maybe that person made one great shot, and that shot was so good that it gained this person hundreds of thousands of followers in a very short amount of time. And after that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then everybody keeps following this person because this person has so many followers. Yeah. So, that's almost impossible to determine quality when it's about art.
All right, Marcel. For these last 3 questions, just give me short instinctual answers so we can get them in. Do you have a favorite photo, both of yours and then of somebody else?
My favorite photograph for myself is the one that I put on my new book. So it's an elephant at the edge of Vic Falls.
So this isn't Mother? This is another book?
Yes, Mother. Yeah,
this is Mother. Yeah.
So on the cover of that is a vertical image of an African elephant standing very close to the edge of Victoria Falls on the Zambia side.
Yeah, that's a magical photo.
So that image for me is it's exactly what I like in my photography. So it's what we call animalscape. So it's an animal in a spectacular environment, combining both wildlife photography and landscape photography. So that's my ultimate kind of photography. That's the style that I like most. And also that was one of my first publications in National Geographic ever in my first year as a professional photographer. So that was it's very important for me. It's also a very well-known photograph, very popular, and it's unique. So there's no second one of that. So that's a lot of very good reasons for me to pick that photograph. It's a lot of meaning for me. And as for the second half of your question, the what popular photograph of another.
Not popular, just your favorite of someone.
Oh,
else.
my favorite one. Yeah, there's quite a few. Huh? There's a lot of very good photographers out there. There's one in particular that I really liked. There's a leopard in Fever Tree by a photographer called David Lloyd that I really liked. That's one of my most favorite leopard photographs. And there's another photograph. I won't describe it because I forgot the name of the photographer, but it's also stunning. Those are the kind of photographs that I wish that I had shot myself. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Very often I
All
see.
right.
Yes. Okay. Go.
No, go on.
No, I talk too much. Go ahead. Next one.
Okay, these last two I've asked every single guest that's come onto the podcast, and so yeah, don't think about it too much. Just the instinctual reaction. What is a country that you are most bullish on looking into the future?
Most what on?
Bullish, excited for. You think they have a very good future ahead of them.
I honestly don't understand the question.
For example,
has nothing to do with photography. You mean?
Nothing to do with photography. Just generally. Like, for example, people might say, I'm bullish on Canada for X, Y, and Z reason. Like, it's got a good future ahead of it. So do you have, when you look at all the countries of the world, do you think, wow, this country has a really good future ahead of it? This is the question.
Yes, New Zealand.
Oh, for God's sakes. Okay. I'm cutting that out for sure.
No, I don't. No, yeah, I explained earlier. I'm a bit of a pessimist, so whatever country I think about, I immediately see all kinds of problems from the news and what's happened and what I see happening. So, sorry, but I don't know.
Sure, no problem.
No.
Finally, if you could witness a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier, who would you like to watch?
Oh, that would probably be Jesus and Muhammad.
No.
Yeah, probably that would have been something that I would like to watch.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Marsel Van Oosten, it's been a real pleasure, truly. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and I hope it was good for you as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot of fun. I actually like these longer interviews. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the podcast by Joe Rogan.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I always enjoy listening to those, and this is one of the reasons. Just having someone that really asks the non-obvious questions and can listen very well, and then having this amount of time also creates the opportunity to go a little bit deeper and past all the obvious questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And also, just for your information, I only asked about half the questions I had here. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah, truly. You know, I mean, I am so fascinated by your work, essentially. You know, and that's the driver of a lot of it. So, if you ever want to come back, we can do another 3 hours on just manipulating aperture.
Yeah. And also talk about the state of the world and politics.
Sure. Yeah. All right, mate. Well, hello. Thank you for sticking around to the end. How did you enjoy that? I hope it was good. Do yourselves a favor, go to his website, squiver.com. There is a link in the description, and you can just peruse through the gallery of the photos that him and his wife has taken, and also some other photographers that contribute to the website. But some of them are so beautiful, so amazing. I take loads of inspiration out of Marcel. But look, you've stuck around to this point, so I assume it's not out of a masochistic interest. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, which is why you might still be here. But What I want to do is corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is that you're listening in from. So, for example, because the podcast directories are in the Stone Age, but you can do something which helps a lot, and that is to subscribe to the show, but leave reviews. So I listen to my podcast on Good Pods. You can leave ratings on each episode. If you listen on Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating on the show itself. That would be amazing, by the way. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, which is where the majority do, you can leave a review, written and stars on the podcast. So please, I ask you, there is nothing you could do more for me than that. And if you've already reviewed, pick up your girlfriend's phone, pick up your mate's phone, your kid's phone, your dad's phone, and just start spamming reviews. Because the more nice reviews that come through, the more other people can see it, the more time I can then dedicate to this podcast, perhaps bring a high level of professionalism with it. I have this beautiful idealistic future in my mind where I can physically go to the guests and talk to them, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Thank you for staying for this long. You're an absolute legend. Goodbye and ciao.